Hello, lords and ladies of the internet. I'm the King of Candor, and today I'm going to be talking about the history of Gnolls in fantasy. Gnolls are these hyena-human hybrid things you see on screen now. They are well known for being brutal warriors, scavengers, and a cannibalistic species. They also find the taste of sentient beings nearly irresistible. So, where did they come from? What has been known of them? Stick around to the end of the video where I answer these questions and tell you how I run them in Enos and how you can run them too. Since this is the first of the human-animal hybrid style races we're talking about, I figured we should cover the animal they are based on. Hyenas. What are they? I know most of you know what they are, but there's a lot of hyena misinformation out there, and I think it's helpful for us to talk about them and the parts of hyenas that informed the modern Gnolls. First of all, they are a unique mammalian species. Even though they look like dogs mixed with cats, they are related to neither. In fact, their closest related relative is the humble mongoose. Hyenas have several unique physical characteristics, such as one of the strongest jaws in the world. They can uniquely bite through elephant hide, which can shrug off small caliber rounds from guns, so that's insane. They also have an incredibly potent stomach, being able to digest stuff that has even died from anthrax, allegedly. I'm not sure who's throwing anthrax at hyenas to see what happens, but I saw it reported enough times that I figured I should mention it here. They also have that unique cry and bark, which sounds like they're laughing. The hyena's laughing cry, mixed with their ability to eat those who died of disease, paints a haunting picture for any uninformed observers. Another thing about hyenas is how intelligent they are. They have, for example, been shown to have teamwork skills comparable with that of chimpanzees. For example, regardless of the senior rank of the hyena, they will also work together with each other to get food, if the task requires two of them working together, shown by this experiment to pull two levers to get a treat. The social rank is ignored here, which is unique because a lot of times animals that have different social ranks won't work with lower social ranks unless it's desperate. Speaking about social rank, hyenas tend to have female-dominated societies, or matriarchies. Almost all mammals are male-dominated, so having these female-dominated societies is quite unique to them. I believe this is related to, well, let's just say hyenas have a unique anatomical part. I will not be covering it here because YouTube would destroy this channel. I will say two things though. First, it is related to reproduction, and second, it led societies before modern science to believe that hyenas were hermaphroditic. So, all these traits are observed by humans and led to mostly negative reputations for hyenas throughout the years. They were often associated with lazy and immoral people. I have seen a lot of people online complaining that this reputation comes from The Lion King from Disney, but this reputation existed before that film and has only been made worse and ingrained by that film, not created by it. If you want some positive hyenas though, I suggest looking into the spotted hyenas of Harar in Ethiopia. These hyenas are friendlier and often eat the garbage from around the city, keeping it cleaner. This relationship started in the 1960s when a famine hit the hyena population hard and they started killing livestock. Many farmers tried fighting against them, but one decided to feed the hyenas instead. He put bowls of cream and milk out for them, and eventually they started guarding his livestock. He also showed other farmers this, and they began training these hyenas using a special language they developed. So, what are some of the local myths like? Different African myths about hyenas doing a wide variety of things happen, such as them bringing the sun to the earth, which is pretty neat. However, for our story, I'm going to focus on specific groups of myths around the human-hyena hybrids. There are several rituals that are secret that involve a human dressing up like a hyena, but these will not be covered, seeing as they're meant to emulate a real hyena, not a unique hybridization of the two. However, there are were-hyenas, and I want to talk about them. Unlike in other were stories or lycanthrope stories, where it is a man turning into a wolf, some were-hyena tales are about hyenas turning into humans. In their human form, these hyenas can mimic voices and wreak havoc on society. They also can change their gender, meaning they are also more amorphous shapeshifters than your typical werewolf. Ethiopia has two different forms though. The first are were hyenas, who were men that rub themselves with sticks and magically turn into hyenas at nights. You also rub yourself with a stick a second time before turning to a human form. The second type of hyena is actually blacksmiths. Known locally as Bodo, it is thought that all blacksmiths are hyenas. The reason behind this is not entirely known, but one theory stands out that is making the most sense to me. In Ethiopic traditions, the power of creation can only be done if the creator takes power from another world, usually through pacts or deals. Blacksmithing would be no exception. And because the skill is passed down generationally, it led to some people being ostracized for it. An important thing to note, in Ethiopia, most blacksmiths are of the Jewish faith, forming tight-knit groups who all practice blacksmithing. This will come back in a moment. Now, why hyenas? It is because hyenas will sometimes go to graveyards and dig up the recently buried dead. They will also find dead bodies in the wild and consume them. In Ethiopia, metal is rare, so many blacksmiths would scavenge the dead bodies looking for previously used metal that can be reshaped. These two facts, combined with the locals' mistrust of Jewish people, has led to the stereotype that blacksmithing Jews are hyenas who eat dead bodies. I'm sure everybody's going to behave in the comments section. Speaking of the comments below, if you like the content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video. If you want to connect with the community, you can join the Discord link below. I'm on my way to getting 2,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so let's see if we can knock that out. I also want to cover a European creature called a crocuta. This monster is the hybridization of a dog and a wolf, and they thought it existed in either India or Ethiopia at the time, at least according to the ancient Romans and Greeks. These crocuta are said to have immensely powerful jaws, the ability to speak like a human, and have magical evil eyes. These evil eyes can do things from cursing you into being able to be dominated or seeing straight through you. The way they describe these beasts, they are just 100% hyenas. By the way, this mythical creature is what gives the hyena its scientific name of crocuta crocuta. The last hyena myth is a scattered one of hyena vampires. I couldn't find any specific myths, but a bunch of articles and blogs kept citing people in North Africa and the nation of Chad and the Greeks for all having tales of a hyena vampire. I personally think these are false or made up because they include things like hyenas bite the neck, leaving 2 puncture wounds and draining the blood. That's way too modern feeling for vampires. If you're curious about vampires though, I cover vampires in fantasy here, and it's linked below if you want as well. From here, we're going to leave the hyena part of our story on pause and start going into linguistics. Where does the word gnoll come from? Be warned, this is a winding path. First, we have the word gnoll with a K, as in a grassy knoll, where there definitely was not somebody else that day in Dallas. A knoll is another word for hill, but it's usually denoting a smaller one. From here, let's travel to the country of Wales, which has many notable hills and knolls. One of these hills has the town of Neath, and there was a fortified manor house built there in the 17th century. Nobody is sure why, but instead of spelling the word correctly, they spelt the manor as the Gnoll House with a G. It was known as this for 300 years at least, before in the later half of the 19th century, as part of the land was taken and turned into a cricket field and a rugby field. The team that played here for rugby was known as the Welsh All Blacks because the uniform was all black. In 1911, they won the Welsh Club Level Championship, and there was much celebration to be had in the town of Neath, including by one Edward J.M.D. Plunkett, Lord Dunsany. Lord Dunsany was a particularly popular fantasy author at the time, and in 1912, he wrote a short story called How Knuth Would Have Practiced His Art Upon the Gnolls. Yes, he spelled it like that because the English people are funny. So now we have the word gnoll in a fantasy story. It's spelled differently, but here we have it. So what's the story about? I have linked the short story below, but I'm going to hit the highlights for you. The story follows a thief named Dr. Knuth and his apprentice. The pair of them attempt to break into the Gnoll house and steal the emeralds from the Gnolls that live there. The area around the house is devoid of animal life, with the trees and the bushes taking on a twisted, gnarly look. The only sign people have ever been there is a skeleton impaled in the tree of a hunter from King George's reign 200 years earlier. The pair of thieves sneak up to the house silently until the apprentice steps on a twig. After waiting for a while to see if anything noticed, he moved on. Mr. Newt did not, because he felt it was too quiet. Even the fairies were silent. He then sent his apprentice forth with a set of lockpicks and a ladder. The apprentice starts to scale the ladder, then stops. He got too scared and turned to tell Mr. Newt as much. Suddenly, and I quote, "But the Gnolls had watched him through the knavish holes they bore in the trunks of trees, and the unearthly silence gave way, as it were with a grace, to the rapid screams of the apprentice Tonker as they picked him up from behind, screams that came faster and faster until they were incoherent. And where they took him? Oh, well, it is not good to ask, and what they did with him, I shall not say." But Mr. Newt grinned. He escaped that day, and he learned a new secret about the Gnolls house. I personally bet he will return later with a new apprentice and try again. So, what do these Gnolls look like? No descriptions exist in the written story. However, the art I've been showing on screen is done by illustrator Sydney Slime, and it gives us some hints. They kind of look like the forest trolls from Castle Crashers, or similar to the early versions of bugbears. If you'd like to learn more about bugbears, by the way, I did that video a few weeks ago, and it is also linked here below. At this point, nearly every other online article and resource I see jump straight to D&D. However, they miss a very important detail, and one I nearly missed as well. I would like to thank A Brief History of Gnolls, Anthropology and Emeralds, From Wales to Wisconsin and Beyond, by Paul Heaney, for letting me know about this next part of the story, because it solves several missing links. This source was incredibly valuable to researching this part of the video, as he managed to talk to Gary Gygax and the other designers before they passed. You see, there's a second story we need to talk about. A sort of soft sequel written 40 years later by a woman in America. In 1951, author Margaret St. Clair, under the pseudonym Idris Seibert, published a story called The Man Who Sold Rope to the Gnolls. I have not found any free recreation of this. However, if you go out getting the PDF of Paul's book on Gnolls, he recreates it there for you to read. There will also be a PDF version of the short story linked in my Discord if you want to read it. The story follows a rope salesman as he bravely sets out, well, foolishly I should say, to go talk to the people in the Gnoll house. He attempts to sell them some rope, and is nearly done concluding the sale as they're offering him diamonds. However, he gets a bit too arrogant and demands some of the emeralds, which upsets the Gnolls so much. They eventually kill him. A few details about the story stand out. Immediately, it is most definitely a sequel to Lord Dunsany's work, since the Gnolls are spelt the same, live in a nice house isolated in the woods, spy through the same trunks and peepholes, and have emeralds in large quantities. They also capture people. Margaret Sinclair adds some interesting details of her own, such as the cannibalism of the Gnolls, which stays with the creatures from here on out. The fact that they have gems for eyes and they can replace it and value them as much as their souls is cool. They're also deaf and mute, owing to their weird forms. By the way, we should talk about those weird forms. Her Gnolls are entirely different, and I kinda hate them. Like I said earlier, Lord Dunsany never described his Gnolls and only had the image Sydney Slime drew as a reference. Sinclair gives a physical description of them, saying they resemble a Jerusalem artichoke made of India rubber with tentacles. As you can see from this picture on screen, this thing's absolutely gross and I hate him. So now we arrive at the first edition of the original white box set of Dungeons & Dragons. I've said in earlier videos how what is actually first edition is contentious and wrapped up in legal battles. All you need to know is in this version of the game, Gnolls are actually gnome troll hybrids. From what I can gather, this is actually a little bit of a joke entry, since they pretty much had a name but no concepts. You see, mechanically, they needed something that went between killing hobgoblins and killing trolls. You see, back in the day, as you leveled up, you just killed higher quality monsters until you got to the end of the dungeon or died. So they had this placeholder enemy, a gnoll, and they just jokingly said it was a hybrid between a gnome and a troll because that's the way the name sounded. I also believe this joke is why the E was dropped and the second L was added. So the white box set has a rather short entry, and I'm going to read it to you in its entirety for you. Gnolls, a cross between gnomes and trolls. Perhaps. Lord Dunsany did not really make it all that clear. With +2 morale. Otherwise they are similar to hobgoblins, although the Gnoll King and his bodyguard of from 1 to 4 will fight as trolls but lack regenerative power. So we're going to cover those interesting tidbits about this real quick. First, mechanically, they're a little bit more fearless and a little bit higher health than hobgoblins. By the way, if you want to know more about hobgoblins, I've got a video for that, linked here and below as well. And there's a lot to unpack there, which is cool because you can first see the power level of this monster. They're not as strong as trolls, and they don't regenerate, though. So this is all pretty good, but they need to be part in parentheses. Perhaps Lord Dunsany did not really make all those clear. I think this is because Gary half remembered this creature and only skimmed the story. Gary was also on many blogs answering questions to the best of his ability. Unfortunately, he's just factually wrong in his answers. Let me show you a post of these and why he's wrong. Well, class, here's a post from Gary Gygax in 2003 where he fully explains the origin of Gnolls. Don't worry, I'm going to read the post for those who are audio only. I made up the Gnoll thinking of it as a cross between a gnome and a troll, and I think the name first appeared in a really bad novel I was writing, The Gnome Cache, part of which was serialized in Dragon magazine way back when. However, in 2002, Gary told a fan who wrote to him asking about this if he remembers the origin of Gnolls, and that fan posted it here. Sure do. There was a short story in the magazine of science fiction and fantasy by Lord Dunsany, as I recall, the man who sold rope to the Gnolls. From that I took the Gnoll and came up with the Gnoll, a cross between a gnome and a troll at first flush. Later I altered it to a regular humanoid as per the AD&D system. So Lord Dunsany did not write the man who sold rope to Gnolls. Margaret Sinclair did. I think Gary mixed up the two stories in his head, and that's when he gave the Gnolls such a confusing look. And that's how they got accidentally turned into gnome-troll hybrids. And we're not really given any more description, because that didn't matter in the white box set. It was purely mechanical, having a +2 morale to hobgoblins as well as an additional hit dice worth of points, like I mentioned earlier. The only other really interesting thing for this edition, though, is elves can speak Gnoll. I don't know why, but it's just there. Thankfully, they would not stay here very long, though, because by the time we got to the first edition of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, we have our Hyena boys. They are surprisingly strong, though, having 2 hit dice for their hit points and being counted as large creatures. They start taking on what you'd expect to be typical Gnoll behaviors and appearances, with them being in large packs and using scavenging to get their gear. Gnolls are also said to be the most sexist and laziest monstrous races, preferring to have their slaves do all the hard work. I'm not exactly why they're the most sexist, considering real-life hyenas are female-dominated, but that's what the book says. We also see a lot of interesting versions of the race, such as the Flynn, a stockier, meaner cousin of the Gnolls. We also get the Shauvsa, a green-colored ghostly or fiend sent by the Gnoll god Yinagu. Speaking of him, Yinagu is also known as the ruler of ruin and goes about just slaughtering things and being a general bad boy. He also made a special form of lycanthropy that turns Gnolls into something called a Gahuna, which is a hyenodon. Think about like a large Ice Age hyena. Second edition provides a couple of new things, such as the fact that Gnolls are carnivores who love consuming flesh. They'll eat just about anything, and their hunger can get them into problems because they overhunt areas. They also enjoy torturing people because it makes them taste better, apparently. I wouldn't know. I haven't been able to torture and eat any gnomes lately. There's also a really cool short story in Dragon 173, which came out in September 1991. I do think it's worth looking up if you want more details, but it's otherwise not important for the history of the race, and I'm going to cover it here. 3rd edition, My Beloved, rolls around, and they're mostly the same, except instead of being large-sized creatures, they are now medium, and they can worship anybody who's evil enough. They even also talk about some nice versions of Gnolls who only hunt animals for their meat, meaning Gnolls can be player characters. We also get another half a dozen random versions of them, with the only one I want to be talking about is the Gnoll Warlock, which is a half fiend. And I'm going to complain about it, but we have to get to the end for what I complain about it. 4th edition powers the Gnolls back up to CR5, the strongest they've probably ever been. Also, we have a change for their origin. Several fiends who failed or upset Yeenoghu are fed to hyenas, and from them, the Gnolls are born. This opens up the version to them having more demonic tainted subtypes, and 4th edition really likes to flesh it out. And finally, 5th edition gives us the lore that most of you know from that one single scene in Baldur's Gate 3.
The creature's eyes roll back in its head, equal parts bliss and agony. She'd eaten, feasted, and yet, looking into her eyes, you can see it wasn't enough. You hear what comes next before you see it. The sharp snapping of bones, and a yelp of pain as her body starts to twist and undulate. You watch with cold realization. This isn't the end of one life, but the start of another. Gnolls, vicious, monstrous humanoids, can spawn from the corpses of dying hyenas. Bones snap as the hyena is hollowed from the inside out, forming a vessel for something new. Her belly splits like a rotten fruit, birthing a frenzy of claws and fangs.
So yeah, hyenas eat too much, flesh burst, and turn into Gnolls. Here they have been weakened significantly from previous versions, going down to about CR 1/2, whereas previously they were about a 3rd level threat. Their new origin being the result of eating the corpses left behind from Yeenoghu killing everything in his path, on a rampage he did. It's pretty metal, but further makes them feel like they should be fiends. Also, apparently, Jeremy Crawford, one of the designers, agrees. Here's his tweet. However, I believe they haven't changed the subtype to fiends because the monster manual is supposed to be open for all versions of the game, and his tweet alludes to it when you see him at the end talk about the Gnolls of Eberron. So why don't we talk about Eberron really quick? As per usual, Eberron has some of the best lore. The Gnolls of Eberron are a semi-uncivilized race that exists in bands of raiders. They still have a deep love of eating flesh, but have a little bit of the cruelty removed from them. They're also not related to the Demon Lord, being possibly related though. However, there are still plenty of good ones, and Gnoll mercenary companies exist, as well as adventurers that quest across the land. As a race, they have an idea that might makes right, but they're also incredibly family-focused. Often, a single member will make a sacrifice of themselves to help the rest of their family. If their family is ever lost, or they're simply born without one, they will find a group of people to make their new family. They also don't care about adoption, with some of the wider clans even adopting warriors and raiders of all races who are strong enough and contribute to the health of the family. So what about hyena people in other settings? In the Dark Prophet saga, which is a series of semi-satirical fantasy novels, Gnolls are described as 3 or 4 foot tall canine people. They are thought to be gnomes that were cursed by the god of evil. I haven't read this series yet personally, but I was told this is in there, and I think this is a nice little callback to the origin of the name with the gnome troll hybrid. So of course we have the video game versions, such as World of Warcraft and EverQuest. They're pretty much the same in these games. I will admit, the World of Warcraft ones are a little bit more interesting because there are several clans that if you show strength to, you can eventually trade with them. which is more than just the incredibly hostile monsters that you see in all the other themes. Also, the ones in World of Warcraft are noted as having an incredible amount of power, but the constant infighting prevents them from using it, which reminded me of the orcs in Warhammer 40k. Pathfinder also did something interesting recently, where they tried to make the Gnolls less evil and more pragmatic, which is something I like. By the way, I'm not using their stupid names here on screen, but they're Gnolls. So they kept the cannibalism and made it about honoring the fall of the dead instead of gorging for demon power, which is a nice change, I think. So now we're going to go right to Enos. For those who are new here, that's the name of my setting and upcoming game system. And if you are new, subscribe so you can see more videos. When I look at the Gnolls, I see two ways that you can take them. The first is going down the hyena people route, and the second is doubling down on that demonic flesh. Let's do the hyena route first. In Enos, Gnolls are hunter-gatherers and semi-nomadic. They have several different cities or camps that they inhabit through different times of the year, traveling between them. While traveling, they scavenge what they can. This scavenging includes any bit of iron or other metals, and when they reach their permanent structures, the Gnolls begin forging objects out of these metal. In fact, they were the first people to discover blacksmithing and turned it into a cultural philosophy about tempering oneself. Just as slag and other impurities are removed when you heat and beat the iron, so too are the weaker members of the tribe removed during the conflict. This philosophy leads them to being much more aggressive than other groups, always seeking to fight worthwhile foes. Lions and hippopotami are common occurrences, but even sentient beings are not safe. Back when the first human kingdom was forming, the Gnolls were the first great threats they faced. However, humans are more adaptable, and while the Gnolls broke their blades upon the walls of humanity picked them up, learning from them. Humans eventually learned this great skill of blacksmithing and began to colonize other lands. Eventually, the Gnolls' tenacity won, and they destroyed the first kingdom in an event called the Sundering of Humanity. After this great battle, so many Gnolls were slain that as a species they could not afford to keep being so violent. Smaller outlying tribes and clans began adopting more peaceful methods, some even being open to trade. Eventually, two distinct cultures of Gnoll grew out, those who stuck to the old ways and those who adapted and became more open to others. This is where the race is today. But what if instead we double down on the demonic flesh angle? 2,000 years ago, the Lord of Slaughter escaped from hell and rampaged across the land. He was eventually returned to hell, but the bodies of those he killed were corrupted. Their flesh was consumed by many opportunistic scavengers such as Hyena. These Hyena had their flesh changed and broken, twisted into the Gnolls that we see today. They became the first of the flesh forged. Violent and hungry, they scour the land, ravaging and killing all they can in the name of their Dark Lord. Other creatures besides hyenas also fed upon the flesh, such as vultures that grew an extra set of wings and teeth upon their beaks. They now act as the scouts and surveillance for whatever clan they work with. Coyotes and jackals also consume the flesh, and they grew extra sets of hind legs, providing with increased speed, and their claws can now rake away the flesh from the belly of their foes. Bears who ate stood upright, with their mouths splitting into a second set of jaws, and their nails growing to the size of knives. Many other creatures such as wild hogs and ravens and other scavengers are also twisted into new monstrous forms. The shamans of these tribes now do rituals in order to invest slain foes and meat they find with the same demonic taint that turned them. They then leave these meats around after consuming it, allowing other scavengers to come by and become twisted to join them. All these flesh forged have a semi-psychic connection to each other, allowing them to always migrate together and for stragglers to always find the nearest tribes to join as part of their bloody conquests. So yeah, that's it. Two totally different takes on Gnolls. Feel free to use them in your fantasy setting. Did I miss any Gnolls? Let me know below. And yeah, that is all for today. Thank you for watching this far. If you enjoyed the content, I appreciate it if you like to subscribe. I'm looking forward to your candor in the comments below. Have a great day. So, I just want to read this quote from Teddy Roosevelt that I couldn't include anywhere. Finally, the hyena is too cowardly to ever be the source of danger to the hunter. It is sometimes a dreadful curse to the weak and helpless. And with that, I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you for sticking around.